Hi, I'm Wyatt Amdahl. I'm an International Falls graduate and former Bronco, and I recently climbed up to the base camp of Mount Everest. I'm going to answer 10 common questions I've gotten about my experience climbing up to the base camp. First one being, where is Everest? So Everest is located in Nepal, and it is the highest mountain in the world. How long did it take me to get to Nepal? I originally left from Minnesota, and it took me 40 hours total of flights and layovers until I finally landed in Kathmandu, Nepal. From there, I flew to Lukla, which is a small town at the start of where the majority of people start their base camp trek. It's known as the gateway to Everest, and it's also known as the most dangerous airport in the world due to its extremely short runway that's located on the side of a cliff. It's actually so short that they have to position the runway at a slight incline so that when the planes land, they're able to slow down fast enough. And then also when the planes take off, it helps with the acceleration and lift so that they can get enough speed on the runway before they reach the end of the cliff. Were there any towns along the way? So along the trek, there were multiple small towns. They consist mainly of tea houses or small shops. Everything is kind of based off of the tourism that Everest brings, and all of the locals in those small towns either provide lodging, sell some type of gear, or food for trekkers that are passing through going up to Everest Base Camp or the surrounding Everest region. What did I eat? So a lot of the food is primarily either wheat-based or pasta or like a potato-based meal. There wasn't much in terms of vegetables or meat. I didn't eat any meat throughout my entire 12 days of trekking because everything that's brought up to Everest is either carried by a person, a mule, a yak, or another form of horse or cow. And so there's no refrigeration, there's no motor vehicles. Everything takes days just to reach some of these towns, and meat can spoil very quickly and can become unsafe to eat. So I didn't eat anything that was like dairy or meat based. Next question is if I carried my own gear or not. So all the gear that I brought was either divvied up between myself or the porter. I hired a company to guide me, and it included a porter. And because of my lack of alpine experience above 14,000 feet, I utilized the porter to carry things like my sleeping bag, extra layers, like a spare shirt, just some extra clothing that I brought along. And then the rest of like my extra layers I was carrying in my small pack, as well as like all my water and some snacks for the day. Who did I go with? So I didn't go with any friends or any family, and I decided to hire that guide company. The name of that company is called Mosaic Adventures. I had a fabulous guide named Madan who had been guiding for many years, absolutely fantastic. And then I also had a fabulous porter who, without him, carrying a large quantity of my weight would have made it near impossible for me to actually complete it in the time that we did. And I also would highly recommend that company. They were brilliant. I was the only person actually on the group tour that I signed up for. So I got a one-on-one service with the guide and having my own porter, and kind of got more one-on-one experience and get to truly get more immersive experience of the culture, which was really nice. Next question is if it was cold. So it was relatively like mild at the lower altitudes. Like a light sweatshirt or t-shirt was fine while you were walking. And then as you increased the elevation, the temperatures started to drop, and the temperatures at night were reaching as low as 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And so there's no heat actually in any of the tea houses. The lodging was essentially just a room with a thin mattress and a light blanket, and then you brought your own sleeping bag. And there were no heat sources in any of the rooms, so you had to sleep with all of your electronics if you didn't want the batteries to get drained overnight due to the decreased temperatures. And then you also had to sleep with your water bottle, otherwise you'd wake up and have just a block of ice inside of your water bottle. So that was interesting, of waking up to 20 degrees inside the room and having to get ready for the day while your toes were frozen to the floor. And then there was like a heat stove in all of the common areas of each tea house. So like the one dining room that was located usually next to the kitchen, that would usually have a wood stove, which they would light an hour or so before dinner, and then kind of once it went out, it was your sign that it was getting late and time to go to bed. So that was really nice. Everyone kind of crowds around the wood stove to stay warm, get to have a lot of fun conversations with fellow travelers. And then as you increase in elevation and get above the tree line, then there's no fuel for any of those wood stoves. So all the stoves run off of dried yak poop or cow poop, and they use that as the fuel source to keep those stoves burning, because there's absolutely no way that they'd be able to carry up wood from the lower elevations in terms of like a fuel source, and propane would take days to get up. And again, it's all hand carried, so the price of that would be absolutely not worth the little bit of heat that they need just for those short hours before they go to bed. And then the final question, I guess I have two more questions. Did I get altitude sickness? I didn't get any official like altitude sickness where I was throwing up or like unable to function, but I did experience like mild symptoms of altitude sickness towards the highest altitude that I got to, and that was only like a moderate headache and then a decent amount of appetite loss. So I think around 17,000 feet, I noticed like I just had to force myself to eat anything, was making myself drink as much water as I could, but I just was not hungry. And then starting to get like those headaches as we were going up different inclines, and it was nothing that I couldn't push through, but I could definitely feel myself starting to not have the acclimatization to the area. The highest we hiked up to was 18,200 feet, and that was the hardest day of actually going to Everest Base Camp, and then the same day turning around and going up to the highest peak that we got to of 18,200. And there it was just like a pounding headache, and then sleeping only a couple hundred feet lower than that and having that lack of oxygen. At that height, it's only around 50% of the oxygen compared to sea level. So every step was like 3 times as hard, and sleeping at that high altitude and lack of oxygen made you have some interesting dreams, which was kind of funny. And you would wake up maybe like every 30 minutes or every hour, just due to like the difficulty of sleeping and not being acclimatized. So I would go to bed around maybe like 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and then wake up at 7 in the morning. But even though I should have gotten 12 hours of sleep, it was more like 6 or 7. And then the final question is just generally like, was it hard? And it definitely is not an easy hike. You're in a totally different environment in some of the tallest mountain peaks and next to the highest mountain in the world. But physically at sea level, it wouldn't be considered very difficult, but the altitude is the main challenge I didn't do any specific training necessarily for it, just general fitness and lifting was enough for me. And I think the general public would be able to complete this hike if it's something they truly want to do, and if they're in relatively good condition. And that concludes all of my questions that I normally get. I hope you were at least somewhat entertained by the questions, and if you have any desire to do Everest Base Camp, I highly recommend it, and hope you enjoyed.